Okay. Why don't we start with the light stuff then, huh? Okay, welcome back. I hope you had a good lunch. Everybody have a good lunch? My apologies for being late. So we just started with a couple questions, maybe not an easy one. Blair asks if with the Westerns teachers that have violated the trust of their students, how should it be handled? Frankly, to me, it doesn't matter if it's Western or not. I think human beings deserve the same kind of people who have been on the tail end of a violation of trust deserve acknowledgement for what has happened. But how to specifically handle it, what I heard you saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is do you have to actually work it out with the student, with this teacher yourself personally, or should you do it elsewhere?
Yeah, it's sort of like, okay, bring it up with them, voice it, or do you sort of have to process it on your own?
So I don't think that's an easy answer, because I think the circumstances will dictate that there are many different kinds of scenarios. But I've now worked on half a dozen cases where students in communities where there have been major violations have come in for therapy. And I have to say, in every single case, the Sangha or community has been completely irresponsible in handling it. And the reason tends to be, if this gets out, it will be the end of the center and the streams of funding will decrease. So there is an investment in maintaining the status quo of an organization that in some cases prevents board members and Sangha members from coming forward with abuse cases or violations that are already well known, and in some cases well known for a very long time. And as a therapist, I think it's unacceptable, completely unacceptable. Completely unacceptable. The Sangha's responsibility is to human beings first. And so if there's a violation with a teacher or amongst the Sangha, it's their responsibility to make sure, first and foremost, that those people that are being abused are protected. And also they have a responsibility to make sure that new members are aware that changes are being made promptly. And so they have to acknowledge that violations have happened. I mean, this is like a standard procedure that I think people get terrified about, because they have investment they're going to lose. That being the case from the I don't want to call victim side, but from the student side, if you know and you are aware that you yourself have been put in danger or jeopardy or have been taken advantage of or abused, a breach in trust has happened, violation, definitely an ethical violation, and you feel safe enough, you should talk to somebody. You should not keep that to yourself for any cost. Whether you can talk to somebody in the Sangha or you can talk to the teacher themselves is always a questionable predicament. How receptive they are, and how well it will be received or acknowledged may be in question. So in that case, it's advisable that you seek somebody outside of the community. And there has been at least 2 cases in Sanghas in the New York City area. And recently, Rigpa went through a disaster. Shambhala is going through a complete disaster. And before that, there were several other occasions where this has happened. And in all those cases, I think they have refused to bring in psychologists, which is just inexcusable. It's just inexcusable. There's been a trauma in the center. Most, if you're a part of that violation, then you have to find at any cost somebody who will hear you out and acknowledge your predicament, because the worst thing that can happen is maybe the violation wasn't avoidable, but the sense of blame and shame that can happen on the tail end of an event. If you have no feedbacks, the opportunity for you to blame yourself or to feel alone with this increases. So in every day that goes by where you remain silent is another day where you could be injuring yourself further, aggravating a wound. So that like wall of silence is deadly. It's deadly. In the case of Rigpa, I've heard various sides of the story, but I think it shows some basic dignity that enough students got together to make a petition. It shows us a level of empowerment. And with the Me Too movement, for example, I think people need to come together when you feel unable to address a bigger issue on your own. So people coming together is an extremely important thing. And I think in the West, I think one strength we do have is that we just won't put up with it in a way. Like, once it comes out of the box, and I think once it comes out of the dark, comes out of the closet, then I think people will seek some kind of justice and make right what has been wronged. But on the back end, I think people then have, in my experience with the Geshe Michael Roach community, are you familiar with Geshe Michael Roach, anybody? That was the community, Three Jewels and the Diamond Mountain incident several years back, where just total cult-like behavior, completely unacceptable in the guise of Buddhism, in the guise of a 3-year retreat. Nonsense, complete nonsense. My experience working with people on the tail end of that cult-like trauma is that it's so deep. It's so deep. The trauma is so deep that it takes a in my experience, it would take a very, very long time to reprogram somebody, because when you start talking about Dharma, you start talking about someone's worldview, how they see the world. And if you spend a lot of time in Dharma and that Dharma is slightly tainted and it gets into the very fiber of your DNA and it begins to orient your world system and your belief system and as a result your behavior, and you live like that, and there you have a cultural conditioning from the Sangha. It's very deep. And then when the violations became clear, Geshe Michael Roach has been lying and doing other unscrupulous activities. It's so devastating that there's a thick shock absorber of denial, first and foremost. But then people's lives feel destabilized, significantly destabilized. Because it's not like, well, I can just, that teaching or that practice, like the Shukden practice is a no-no, right, in NKT. You shouldn't be practicing that practice. But when you have a distorted worldview out of which your entire world hinges, how you see the world, like I believe that Geshe Michael Roach's view on the relationship between karma and emptiness is completely solipsistic. His presentation of karma and emptiness makes you feel responsible for everything, and is kind of a hiding place for some grandiose narcissism. And so he makes people feel incredibly powerful because they can do absolutely everything with their mind. But on the other extent, if something bad happens, they are responsible. So like him and his so-called Dakini, they thought they created the World Trade Center disaster. I mean, that's just crazy. But it is a kind of inverse narcissism. It's a pathology. But so the students, some of the senior students believed that they were like angels, living bodhisattvas, and were serving them like with a tremendous amount of devotion. And then once your teacher falls, I imagine it will take years and years and years for people to recover. So we have to be really, really aware. I mean, I think you have to confide in at least one other person, and you have to really evaluate if exposing these kinds of things to the teacher and having a direct confrontation is worthwhile or not. And the one thing that I would say, whether it happens, if it happens in a spiritual community or not, or it could just happen in your own relationships, the number one thing that you have to evaluate is if someone is really receptive to hearing this kind of feedback. Are they really ready to change? And if they're not ready to change, then it's not worth your while, but that doesn't mean you should stay stuck trying to figure it out in order to move on. The number one responsibility you have is to yourself, and so you should move on. Now, I have to say, in relation to this, there was a wonderful. This may be more detail than you want, or it may not. I might not even go in the right direction. It's Blair.
Blair.
Do you want to follow up with something if I have missed it?
I can, but this is answering.
It's going okay in the right direction. I have to share an incredible perspective that Geshe Tenzin Zopa shared, because we had several students in our pilgrimage that had been recipients of abuse or scandals in the fallout of different various communities, including Shambhala and the Diamond Mountain crew and Rigpa. And it happens to be that all three of these practitioners were women. And in the consultation with Geshe Tenzin Zopa, they had expressed how much shame they had carried how much shame they had internalized as a result of these scandals and these abuses. And Geshe Tenzin Zopa said, "You're pure. You've done nothing wrong." But he said it in such a way that I think for the first time each and every one of these women heard it, really heard it. And so we have, in the context of a discussion on karma, which we can also have, there are often these teachings in tantric traditions about samaya and about how one's conduct is the cause for one's predicament or circumstance. And so these women had internalized that the abuses that they were receiving as a result of their relationships with their tantric teachers was actually the cause of their own negative karma, and had internalized not only the abuse but a tremendous amount of shame. And at some point, Geshe Tenzin Zopa clarified this in a way that I have never heard anybody clarify. Is everybody on the same page with me? Yes or no? Yes. So what he said was, when the teacher is acting virtuously and you see something that's negative, it's your karma. In other words, and I think he used the example of the teacher being late, and you feel irritated, or you feel something subjectively like something's off because the teacher is late. He said, in that case, it's useful to see that as the result of the ripening of your karma. But when the teacher has an actual violation in ethics, has not maintained ethics, has been inappropriate, has broken their own vows from their own side, then you have to acknowledge that that has nothing to do with you. And I found that to be such a middle way, very skillful presentation of karma, that set free people who have been on the short end of an unacceptable behavior, but who have unnecessarily internalized it as their fault. Because I do believe that in a way can end up being the worst part of these tragedies, is how much self-blame we have, and confusion, and keep it to ourselves. And what's happening in the darkness of your own internalization is that you're repeating it over and over and over again and not finding a solution. And then I think it lets off the lamas, because in Rigpa's case, Sagyal basically abandoned ship and said, I'm going into retreat, and there's no accountability whatsoever. So I don't think we're doing him any service by not requiring him to hold to account the allegations held against him. I don't think it's fair, and in any other context, that somebody can just write a letter and excuse themselves from that. So again, I think these are one of the problems of maybe two cultures clashing. And again, I have to take responsibility from my particular point of view. If you had a Tibetan here, maybe they would say something different. You want to add to it?
No.
Nothing.
No, that, I mean, you said a couple of things that really resonated. I have another question, but it's on a completely different subject.
Is there nothing, no follow-up to something that heavy? Because it's really, I mean, we could talk about Buddhism all day long, but these are really critical things.
I don't actually know what the allegations are.
Which ones?
Any of them.
Well, they're all in the newspaper, and you can do some research, and it's all there. You can go look at it. I mean, these are not small things. The thing is, I think we should talk about them. They're out in the newspaper, and nobody wants to talk about them. You have the NKT with the Shukden and the Chinese government funding. You have allegations of sexual misconduct with Shambhala and the Sakyong, which is now 3 generations old, completely unacceptable transgenerational trauma. Geshe Michael Roach basically married his tantric seductress and empowered her to feel like she was Vajrayogini, and empowered her to lead a 3-year retreat with some 30 members who committed their life to 3-year retreat, to somebody whom in my own personal psychoanalytic analysis of her journals is suffering from a borderline personality disorder. And Michael Roach, in my estimation, is a narcissist, pathological narcissist, and a liar. So I am now putting myself in a position where I'm slandering people, which is why, from a Buddhist point of view, you're meant to keep very quiet. But when I heard Geshe Tenzin Zopa tell me point blank, make sure you promote your Dharma teachings, because students who are new to Buddhism are going to find their way to the top of the list of the Google search, and at the top of the list of the Google search is NKT. And if you don't also try to market yourself, you're never going to provide a service that is authentic and from an authentic lineage, and everybody will be deceived. What are you supposed to do with that? I mean, he's coming from a good place. I think what he's trying to do is alert consumers about their choices and their responsibilities. I don't think he's trying to defame anybody. I don't think it's out of malice. I think it's out of concern. And when you have Chinese funding you, and you have beautiful temples, and you can market yourself in a strategic way where most people are going to find their way to your center, there's a growing concern. It's not very comfortable stuff, but what's our Dharma practice for if we can't talk about difficult things? And you all have to be the judge for your own self. You have to look at the newspapers, and you have to dig deeper, and you have to talk and interview to people and see what the grain of truth is. Like for the Rigpa scandal, I think suspending your judgment and inquiring further is your first responsibility. But I did enough poking around to really see that something unscrupulous and unacceptable has happened there. I feel strongly about that.
This kind of takes us back to what we were talking earlier about the correct relationship with the teacher. And I just wonder whether the way Tibetan Buddhism in particular holds the teacher in such high regard is too risky for us who are not brought up in a tradition that understands that. And it's kind of set up to be abusive, because you've got that, then you've got the tantric practices which can easily degenerate and can be abused. And it just seems to be like a recipe for disaster.
I agree with you. I agree with you. On the other hand, I think if no one's going to sort it out, I think the advantage that we have is that we're incredibly smart. We're smart, disciplined people. We lack devotion, and we have this broken childhood syndrome where we have fantasies about what people can do for us, but we also have incredible amounts of intelligence. And so, it's still in the dissemination of Buddhism to the West. It's still very early. I mean, don't think for a second that in Tibet, as they received Indian Buddhism, that they didn't have centuries of trying to figure this stuff out. And so we're only a couple of generations in. And we've had scandals, but there haven't all been scandals. I mean, for every scandal there, don't forget, because of the negativity bias, there's at least 5 Dharma centers or communities that are without scandal. You guys being one of them, right? Okay, well, ups and downs is human. Okay, ups and downs happens. I mean, I'm thinking of Jewel Hart with Gaelic Rinpoche, who was my senior teacher and passed away 2 years ago. His community, he like Geshe Tashi Tsering, spent 30 years in Ann Arbor, Michigan with his community that grew up around him. Very mature students, went his whole life disrobed appropriately, married, and continued practicing Dharma, and was without scandal in his career, and his legacy is unblemished. And there are other great lamas like that. Lama Zopa Rinpoche is without scandal. So we have to remember it is possible. But more importantly, what can we learn about ourselves along the way? And if we're not the direct recipients of these kinds of incidents, we still have a lot to learn, and we can be there as support for other people. Like for example, very good people in the Shambhala community, their network may collapse. So where are all these sincere Dharma practitioners? And that's what Geshe Tenzin Zopa was saying to these girls. You guys are beautiful. He even said your practices are pure. You did nothing wrong. Continue your practices. Some of them had doubts if they could even, I mean, if your worldview is disturbed and you don't know how to pick, what's that game with the sticks? Pick out sticks. Which one's the broken stick to pick out? Where do you start? Which is the thread in the belt, in the canvas that you can pull out? And they're going, what should I do? And he's like, you just keep practicing. You didn't do anything wrong. Your sincerity is beautiful. Your intention is beautiful. But in order to keep practicing, these people will have to find other communities. And maybe before that, they're going to have to do some trauma therapy to even build up the resources and the trust again to begin to enter into another community. I mean, haven't we all we've been divorced, we've lost relationships, we've been hurt, but we also, maybe the most effective thing that we can do is learn from them to make the next one better. And if we're really invested in the Dharma, we have to understand that we're in the Dharma's infancy in this country and in the West, and we're responsible not only for our immediate selves in our lifetime, but what are we going to do to contribute for the Dharma's longevity and the maturity of the people that come after us? So that's definitely our responsibility to figure that out and to add to the equation. And if that means like our centers from now on have a spiritual bypassing course, and if our centers have a psychologist on staff for counsel, that we have an independent board and committee that will regulate the activities of the guru. If these things are things in the West that we add on as a result of experience, then we can only protect future generations so that the Dharma can continue. What was your other question?
It was in regards to that it's important to have, like, not rotely reciting prayers and
Yeah.
making sure there's this vitality to it. And I can see how in the visualization, there's a lot of emotion, you know, like love and gratitude and devotion. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on a more sensory engagement, like the body, and how useful that is, how deep of an engagement you can have with it in the visualization, especially as you become the archetype or the mentor.
It's incredibly important. I mean, the body is the new frontier. It's the frontier in the tantric practice, and it's the frontier in depth psychotherapy. You know, all the new modalities and all the hybrid integrative psychotherapies of late all include the body, because the neuroscience right now is showing that the body is the vessel for all the imprints of trauma. And if you have your therapies that are based on neck-up conversations, you actually don't go deep enough to really process the imprints. And in the tantric tradition, the same is true. If you want to hasten evolution or speed evolution, you have to situate your enlightenment path in the body, which is why all the mandalas actually represent neural maps for your awareness to engage in your chakra system. So even in the preparatory tantric practices that we're practicing, why I include the mantra. Do you guys like the mantra, Om Ahum? Or is it too much? Is it too esoteric? It's cool? Yeah, I mean, you get a vibration, and you get a vivid vibration in your body. And it you know, the thing with there are two phases in Tantra. One is called the generation, and the other is called the completion, sometimes called the perfection. So the first phase is so that you generate an image, and then begin to imagine yourself at a self-image level, reformatting yourself. Reformatting your self-image is the basis of the generation stage of Tantra. On the basis of emptiness, you reconstruct yourself, which creates a sense of permeability. It doesn't demolish your sense of self. It creates permeability or flexibility, like an alloy that has been tempered by fire. It doesn't destroy the ego. It creates creative fluidity of the ego. It's a difference. But then in the second phase, in the completion stage, then you take that self-image and you allow it to be inhabited in the body. And you rewire or rework the energy channels, winds and drops, so that the actual physical body in life, in so-called quote-unquote reality, can be transformed on a new basis of a more flexible self-image. So the body becomes so important, really important. Otherwise, it can just be a disembodied, nice idea. But once it has taken root in the body, then that's how you get. Like think of Lama Yeshe. You see some of the pictures of Lama Yeshe. You can see that he's very animated. And the pictures of him are really. You can see that. What I see is that someone who's really mastered the Tummo practice, because he has a lot of inner fire, creativity, and his body actually changed. So yes, I think if we don't connect some of these ideas to actual experience and sentiment, they will be flat, and they will be, and we're too smart to get away with ideas. I think that's one of the biggest spiritual bypassing that we're very capable of being. One of the sharp end of the sword, one side of the sword, is that being smart also means we can deceive ourselves that we know a lot of concepts really, really well, but they don't really hit our experience, and they don't transform the way that we feel and act. So that's why I think it's useful every time you practice to stop after you've done your prayers, because then it can just be parrot and try to connect with some feeling. Like one of the things I did with the pilgrims is that I intentionally, like at each of the stops along the pilgrimage path where we did practice together, I would stop people and ask them to come together as a group, like almost like a group embrace or a group hug, and I would have them use their focal awareness or their focal attention to really savor the moment. And this is a recommendation that Rick Hansen gives. He's the one that really coined the term, he may not have coined it, but he definitely used it to advantage the evolutionary negativity bias. In his book, Hardwiring Happiness, he talks about how we fail to acknowledge good circumstances that could actually displace our tendency towards depression and spike our sense of well-being because we don't focus on the good things that are happening to us. So along the pilgrimage route, I had people stop when we were in the midst of a high experience and really, really acknowledge it. And I imagine that it's almost like a data file that months or years later, you can instantly go back to and recall it. And because it's embodied, you can channel or you can reactivate that feeling. And so this is what I believe ceremonies are intended to do. So your graduation ceremony or your marriage, your wedding ceremony, or your refuge vows or your refuge ceremony are intended to be like that. But if we don't also do our side of the work, like the Lama can have the rice and the feathers and the glitz and the glam, but if you don't savor it and make a concerted effort to download the experience into your heart, into your nervous system, then I think the moment passes and the residual benefits are short-lived. But if you really consolidate things, like 10 years or later, you can go back and you can reclaim it. And when you reclaim it, what's happening is you're bringing it up off the hard drive into consciousness, and your brain is reading it in the same way as if it was actually happening now. So that's like you get multiple hits of enjoyment from the one. I mean, that's very American. More bang for your buck. So why not? And that's what a visualization simulation is if you had a wonderful experience with Tashi Tsering before he left, and you've been a long-time student, and there were those moments of grace where he touched your cheek or whatever it was, you bring it up now, that moment of joy, and it's right here, right now for your pleasure, for your enjoyment. That's the power of your imagination. But it's visceral, it's in the body. I don't know what they put in that curry, but I'm an emotional guy today. Okay. Yes.
Just a comment.
Yeah.
About this body aspect of things. I watched the documentary Tony Robbins.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm Not Your Guru.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'd had his name, but I didn't really know much about him or how he worked. And he was very captivating and compelling. And I just thought, what is this? What's going on here? Like, something was at play.
Oh, yeah.
When he does his big, his conference thing.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of things at play there.
Yeah. And you can see things really happening.
Yes.
And I thought, okay, I can see that something's happening. He does know how to communicate, but I didn't really get it.
Yeah.
But then when he was being interviewed and talking about it, he was talking about how traumatic events, like when you have a car crash or something, it's embodied. It's like it's so intense that it stays with you. And he's like, what I'm trying to do is to give people the same but with a positive.
Yeah.
Things that they need to reach a really high positive state, but so intensely
Yeah.
that they can tap back into that once they go home.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, that's what's going on.
Yeah.
I thought, how is this powerful for people when I just didn't get it?
Yeah. So Tony Robbins, some of his workshops are 9 and 10 hours long in one day. Never mind your bloody tea breaks. But how they start is that some of these are 5,000, 10,000 people strong in football stadiums, and they start with really loud music and dancing or jumping. Which probably he's learned that there are some Kundalini type practices that you can do to activate the heart rate and the respiration and put yourself into what's called a flow state. So high activation. And the benefit of high activation is that you become on order of 10 times smarter, more receptive. Which is why the tantras are called the vehicle of bliss and emptiness. Because the same understanding is also present there, that if you tap the neural chemistry of your own neurochemical or neuroendorphin processor, you can create flow states that make you more inclined to reach the direct perception of emptiness. But there's more than that going on. I mean, he's got theater. He's got psychodrama. He's also an incredibly captivating and charismatic person. And he's a giant of a man. He literally is a huge man. And there's a lot of little different ingredients there. I mean, I think some of his techniques are good too. Like he really demands that people do a heavy inventory, which we might do a little today when we talk about karma. And then, of course, I think we have lost things like ritual and community. So suddenly, what is it like to be in Wembley with 20,000 people? You know, it puts you into an altered state. And when you're with Tony Robbins and there's blaring music and you have 5,000 people, and he's saying that you can change your life, and you're in an altered state, yeah, you feel pretty powerful. But I think what you're referring to is that the very powerful psychology of that being integrated as a result of that state into a very deep place. In other words, it goes deeper than the conceptual and gets integrated in a more primary place, which is exactly where the traumas are. The only question I have is, do you believe that the traumas are being replaced somehow, or are you just adding positive states? See, in my estimation, you still have to process all those traumas.
I would think of it as, it's still like, think of like, if trauma's like darkness, it's just that light comes in and it kind of dissipates a bit. It's not that it replaces it, it's like, shifts it. It's just that it meets it.
Yeah. And I think the current therapies are about recognizing the power of using a positive emotional state in order to access and transform the negative traumas. So there is a whole movement towards not only the body, but flow states, positive emotions, not to bypass the negative, but to actually meet them and create a new network with them. Anybody else?
A follow-up on that, just because a lot of what I've been reading lately and experiencing is how much the nervous system plays into awakening. And like when you introduce that, it's sort of like that's such a heightened, altered state. It's so high impact. And I'm like, how do you sustain that? It just seems like down-regulating the nervous system is closer to what a lot of contemplative arts are doing. And like that seems to make you, it gives you a sense of trust. Like
The down-regulation.
yeah, like that you can actually be here, right? That you can actually be totally here. So what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think these different practices serve different purposes. I think as long as you have, I mean, I think in the West we have a smorgasbord. We have so many varieties of practices, but I'm not sure how much discernment we have about which ones serve which one can be applied judiciously and appropriately. For example, mindfulness meditation is a down regulation, you could say, in order to get to a place where you can then create emotional tolerance for discomfort without reactivity. That's its main function. And if you know that with that intended purpose, you can get that benefit. Some of the other practices, like the pre-tantric and tantric practices, they are activating. And the Kundalini yoga, is there any yogis in here? The Kundalini yoga is incredibly active. So if I've had patients who have a lot of trauma and they go to the first Kundalini experience and they have like a mind-blowing experience. They're very activated. And they feel good because there's a lot of endorphins with that practice. But they might go in the third or second or fourth session, that heightened activation then can just trigger something. And they're not ready for it. And then suddenly trauma is released. So they haven't been advised, and they haven't been warned or given the appropriate concern about how to, because you can, in a way, like you just stroll off the street into a yoga center and you can monkey around with your nervous system with techniques that for 1,000 years were secret and only passed orally with with a lot of safety measures. You know, you can just roll in and get like, and like blow your mind in like 15 minutes for £2, you know, like you don't know, there's no checks or balance about it. So in trauma, like the person's regulatory system has been impacted. So maybe they can't sustain the outer ranges, and that then sends them into a decompensation where their high arousal triggers a manic episode or a hypomanic episode, and then that then triggers a depressive episode. So you've now entered into this world where what's supposed to be used to harness a heightened state of consciousness in order to learn has actually just triggered you into a kind of bipolar situation. So you have to be careful. You have to be really careful. These are powerful things. I mean, yoga asana with pranayama and meditation, they're very powerful things. And there's a variety of them, and they serve different kinds of purposes. So, I mean, we think we're catching up to get to know a little bit about what might be appropriate for us at when and what we're trying to do. Shall we move a little further into the class? Yeah. Go ahead. Okay, we talked about mandala offerings already. Go ahead. Okay, keep going. We have another set of slides. Is that what you do? How do you guys feel about doing a little renunciation, karma, and refuge talk? Any other questions while we're swapping out the deck? Somebody? Anybody? Is there anybody out there? Say it again.
Just at what the last week you said about the practices and how some of them can be damaging and how it just reinforce how important is a qualified teacher who will just gradually guide us actually on the path from simple refuge, well not simple, but from basic
I agree. I think this is one of the brilliance about how FPMT has constructed itself. It doesn't just give a one-off course. It understands that the Lam Rim takes time, and it provides a modular course of study in the context of support. And if the Lama can be available, all the better. But I also think that senior students are not utilized very well. You don't have to be a geshe. I mean, there's people here that have been around the block for 15 years. They can really serve as good peer support. And sometimes they get underutilized, which is unfortunate. And I also think that some people would relate better to peers than they would the teacher. The senior students are a very good asset because they're more approachable. We're just peers. Okay, so we're in the Lam Rim, and we've spent a long time on the visualization practice. And the steps of the stages of the path, the root of the path is the mentor. We have talked about the mentor. And the outset, the several stages after the mentor, what are called the 4 mind turnings. And within the 4 mind turnings are also the concept of refuge and finally the concept of renunciation. So one can say that the outset of the path, the first stage of the path, leading up to renunciation has these major principles. And so maybe we can do some of them. There'll be reminders. Everybody's gone through these already. So if so, then we can just focus on karma, because I have a little bit of an different interpretation of karma, and I'd like to spend the duration of the day on that. So everybody has been through the 4 mind turnings before? Has anybody not? a couple of you. Okay. Okay, let's do the slides quickly. Okay, precious human life endowed with liberty and opportunity is a teaching that is the reminder that you have absolutely, if you've found your way to the Dharma Center, you're already won the lottery, because you have an embodiment. You live in a country where the Dharma is freely accessed. You have a predilection or intention to learn. You have the sense faculties intact in order to learn it. You have the support and the resources and the disposable income and the time. These things in the context of the broader swath of humanity is extremely, extremely rare. Extremely rare. Any one of number of those things might be off, and you wouldn't have an opportunity to study Dharma. And if you don't study Dharma, there's not an opportunity to gain liberation. Notice I say Dharma, not Buddhism. There's a big difference. So this is a teaching basically to celebrate how close you already are, and especially from a multi-life perspective. The kind of cosmology that the Tibetans and ancient Indians are coming from is one in which we find ourselves circling in a condition or circumstance since beginningless time, and taking as a result of karmic propensities, taking rebirth in different kinds of conditions and circumstances. And out of all of them, some of them are very severe and some of them are very sublime, but the only one out of all of them that entitles you or gives you the right circumstance or conditions in which you can become awake is the human life form. It is considered just painful enough to keep you motivated to look for an existential answer, but just providing enough relief for you to settle your mind in order to reach or see the nature of reality. So that is considered the same kind of conditions for there to be, for example, water on this planet compared to all the other stars in the solar system or something like that. They would say the same thing, like a cosmologist would say the same thing, that the conditions coming together for there to be water on this planet is a miracle, like nothing short of a miracle. So how many of you feel like your life is a miracle in that way? So just take a moment, like everybody right now is out shopping. They're still lingering in the Friday night boom. You're here. Like something has brought you here. You are healthy enough. You have an interest in something so esoteric as the mind and spirit that you have found your way to a Dharma Center where at one time an amazing teacher has left his legacy. And you have colleagues who are here who want the same thing. And so from a grand point of view, that is so rare and so precious. And really the main thing to do is just savor that. Feel a tremendous amount of gratitude. And feel like you are working your way closer to discovering why you're really here, which is finally going to be existentially satisfying you. And the Matrix, the Morpheus says, he says to Neo, it has been like a thorn in your mind. In the back of your mind, you always knew something was off and you didn't really do much about it. But now you're doing something about it, and now you can do something about it. And it's incredibly, incredibly, more than 10,000 lottery tickets winning, they say that. Finding the precious human embodiment with all its ripening conditions. Because it's not just having an embodiment and not being a human being. Like my father was a materialist through and through. He worked his way from Liverpool, didn't finish high school, found his way to a business opportunity, made himself a self-made businessman with a lot of money and interest. And he would walk past my room when I was a kid, and I'd have a library of Buddhist books, and throughout my entire life with him, all my career, all my pilgrimages to India, my shaving of my head, my taking of refuge, my chanting, and all the nonsense, he never asked me once what the hell I was doing. Like, why was I doing it? Just absolutely no interest at all. So you can have a precious human embodiment, but what makes it precious is when you have this inclination to seek the truth. You are all truth seekers. That I don't have to have a conversation with you over lunch to know that. You are all truth seekers. Next slide. Those are the endowments. We can continue. Keep going. You have everything that you need. It's nothing short of a miracle, but it could be lost today. This afternoon, it could be lost. There's no guarantee. So this is the other sobering reflection. So all of these Lam Rims are themselves mini meditations. So the first meditation is to contemplate those 18 endowments and to go through them in a concentrated way so that you become keenly aware of just how precious your human circumstances are. But this is where the body comes in, is if you reflect on those keenly, it should activate a particular kind of emotion. So if you contemplate the preciousness of human life, what kind of emotion would it activate? If you're doing it well. Gratitude, yeah, appreciation, right? So most of you are familiar with the term shamatha vipassana, which means the tranquility and insight versions of practice. So there are two disciplines in the meditative tradition of Buddhism. One is to have single-pointed focus, and the other is to have analytic consideration or contemplation. Most other spiritual traditions have the concentrative. It's not unique to Buddhism to have a concentrative meditation that gives your mind one point of focus so that you become tranquil. But it is very unique to Buddhism to stop short your concentration before you reach a non-dual state or a state of selflessness or a state of absorption, to stop short of absorption, but preserve your critical faculty enough that you maintain the tranquility, but you retain your ability to be incredibly critical, analytic. And the combination of that creates an environment where your brain is focused and receptive, but still capable of learning. So in a contemplation practice, most people, non-meditators, if you ask them what meditation is, they'll say something like getting rid of thoughts, right? Or focusing on your breath. Those are the pop cultural associations. But you can be meditating on a concept. Yes? Yeah, so you can take preciousness of human life and you can be focusing your attention on the qualities of the precious human life, which is the lists, the endless Indian lists. You go through each one in your mind and you're meditating. And then at the end of the list, then you create a sense of appreciation. And I think what one should do, and what I write in the book, is once you have generated that sense of appreciation, you stop the analysis and you focus on the appreciation. For the exact reason that I mentioned earlier with my group, when I would stop them mid-pilgrimage track so that they could really consolidate the sense of joy and then return to it later at later moments, returning and retrieving like a file from the data bank of that sense of joy and allowing it to bubble up. So now you have like an archive in here of felt sentiments. So if you do your meditation practice, you go through the list, you're using your analytic mind, your discursive thinking, your left brain, but then you then suddenly feel some welling up of some appreciation. Then you suspend your analysis and you drop into concentration, and you actually concentrate in the body on that feeling, and you really do what Rick Hansen suggests, which is absorb your mind like a tea bag, and then you can put it in the file, in the data bank. So these meditations are all like that. You would go through a process of sitting down calmly, looking at the reflections after a study period. Maybe you have months of courses on the Lam Rim, and then you become familiar with them, and then you retrieve that, or you create that sense of, and each one has a different kind of emotion. And they're all listed in the book, in the roadmap, the section where you go through all the steps. I have also highlighted what a possible scenario might be for the emotion that they create. So death creates, there are three contemplations with death: the certainty that one will die, the uncertainty of the time that one will die, and the fact that the only thing that will help at the time of death is your Dharma practice, your death process experience. your confidence that you're going to be able to maintain your presence of mind through the bardo. So the contemplation on death, if done well, creates what kind of emotion? What is it? Urgency, yes. It's not fear. If you're doing a meditation on death and it creates a lot of fear, don't focus on that. Which is what I think we're doing in our culture. We're actually focusing on the fear part. And so now the association of death instantly creates that data bank retrieval of a lot of fear. So the same process can be used with the right kind of confidence, urgency. No time to waste. The conditions are right. You are a supreme vehicle for awakening. It should happen right now because tomorrow you have no clue, no guarantee what might happen. Next slide. I did talk about refuge, my kind of idiosyncratic interpretation of refuge. The one that I think for me has worked in my life is not to think of refuge as bowing to some external agent, but is about recognizing how powerful the mind is in its ability to intervene and course correct the trajectories of your own momentum. And so if you recognize that you have been conditioned culturally and familially and through evolution for different kinds of trajectories, and that your unconsciousness is driving the bus of your ship, or your bus, your unconscious is driving the bus, then what taking refuge is recognizing how powerful you are to reclaim agency and direct or steer your consciousness, your trajectory. That is what a moment of taking refuge is. It is physically embodied by a prostration to the Buddha, but this is what I think is the actual practical import of what refuge means. Next, the next one. Okay. I'm about to just step into dangerous territory here. Blasphemy. But no one's going to watch this anyway, so it's okay. Okay, there's a very traditional presentation of karma, which you have all been exposed to, which I'm not challenging or critiquing. I'm simply offering a slight alternative. Okay, so I'm not trying to change your mind. I'm just presenting karma in a slightly different way, with the intention that I think could be slightly more practical, or at least avoid some of the fallout of the traditional interpretation of karma, without making such an alteration that it becomes a completely different thing. Karma is taken from the word, from the root Sanskrit word kur, which means action. And what it was used as in a pre-Buddhist context, in the Vedic context, was ritual action, in which the Brahmana caste would be the ritual fire experts, the puja experts. So if you wanted to you wanted to have a child, or you wanted the crops to be fertile, you would go to the ritual expert, and they would make a sacrifice or an offering to the fire. And that activity would bestow a kind of cause and effect relationship. Rains would come, a child would come, wealth would come. So they had this word karma, which is there is a cause and there is an effect. When the Buddha comes onto the stage, he's saying that the ritual action is not what causes the effect. It is everybody is their own ritual activity. Everybody's their own fire expert, in a way. Everybody is the creator of their circumstance. So it takes, and this is, he was against the caste system and the hierarchy of power. So he's basically restoring power to everybody and saying we're all capable of creating our worlds. So this is the basis of the traditional explanation of karma. The only slight problem that I have with it is that it too broadly accounts for everything that is happening. In other words, a tsunami of 2005 that devastated the shoreline of Sri Lanka is typically explained by the lamas as the result of karma, which means like a group of people on the shoreline, including children, because of things that they have done in the past, have brought a great tidal wave that destroys their villages and kills their people. This is a very common interpretation. Or if you get cancer, you have gotten cancer as the result of some negative karma in your past. Does everybody follow? This is like the standard. This is the standard thing. So you get cancer because you were unkind to others or violent to others. A tsunami befalls you and your people because of something that was previously caused in your past life, and collectively you are now reaping the benefits or reaping the repercussions. And so some of the research that my mentor Joe Luizzo has done is that we found certain texts that said that karma was presented a slightly different way. It's not the mainstream place. And of course, the teachings on karma are what are often called relative teachings, whereas the only definitive teaching is emptiness. There's only one way to teach emptiness. It's a definitive teaching. There may be several ways to teach karma, several interpretations of karma. One of them splits karma into various disciplines, and it acknowledges that cause and effect is taking place in different domains, but not all of them are psychological. So the point is that there's always cause and effect. There is environmental cause and effect. There's biological cause and effect. There's psychological cause and effect. And there's also the cause and effect of someone who has gained enlightenment. Dharmic cause and effect. We would all agree as modern Westerners, and particularly if any of you are like a meteorologist, for example, that we know that there's cause and effect with the weather patterns in the environment. It's not random, right? Maybe someone like me can't tell you why there's rain on a particular day, but somebody with that kind of expertise could see that there's a cause and effect relationship. It's not random. The same with organic materials, that seeds and plants and organic matter, there is a cause and effect principle at play. It's not random. But are they being caused by human mind? That's the question, and that's the difference between this kind of different interpretations of karma. One's own subjective experience is not random. According to this interpretation, one's subjective experience is the ripening effect of past activity. Do you see the difference? So, the tsunami that hits the shoreline is not random. It is part of a cause and effects matrix. How one perceives the tsunami hitting the shoreline is not random. It is part of a cause and effect matrix. But there are two separate cause and effect matrices simultaneously happening. Do you follow? I'll agree with you there, that your cause and effect led you to that point. Where I have trouble is that your cause and effect then also created that environmental circumstance. So the meeting is perfectly fine. And I would even put it into a more sensitive issue about a victim and an abuser. The standard pitch is that a child that's the recipient of abuse in the Catholic Church because of pedophilia has caused that in a past life. That's the standard pitch. Correct? Which I find problematic, because I think what it ends up doing is sending a very disempowering message to people. But like, for example, whom I have a tremendous amount of respect with, Venerable Rabina will absolutely hold that fiery party line. And I don't have the gumption to stand up to it. But I do know that how the terrible consequence that that interpretation does have on people who have sustained awful abuses. Now they have, in the same way that the women that came forward to Geshe Tenzin Zopa have felt for a very long time instigators and karmic recipients. Now, if you're willing to say that the tsunami has its own cause and effect, and you have made choices to bring yourself there, and there's a meeting of two cause and effect conditions, and then there's still room for the interpretation of how you receive the event. You're not responsible for the event, you're only responsible for the interpretation. So if somebody, an abuser, and you meet in a particular moment, you're not somebody's puppet. This is what I had a problem with in Geshe Michael Roach's interpretation of karma, is that if you came to hit me right now and it hurt, he would say that my karma caused you to do that. Like you're a marionette in my narcissistic, solipsistic world. You have no agency at all.
But then from my point of view, it's my karma that caused, it's my karma that caused you to be there so that I could hit you. So where did the two meet?
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm nothing but a player in your karmic world, and you're nothing but a marionette or a puppet in my karmic world. But let's just say, just to continue the conversation, so you make choices to arrive at the Sri Lankan coastline. The tsunami is being caused by its own weather patterns and causes and conditions, and the two circumstances meet. One doesn't cause the other one doesn't cause the other one, but they are all still operating not by random forces, but by causes and conditions. Then the storm line devastates your family and you lose your children. Is it possible that you could conceive or perceive that situation or that event in a number of different ways? Yes or no? Okay, in the standard presentation of karma, it would be a devastating event which would be the result of negative karma. Because people died. But because my problem with that is it's empty. It is empty because I also was very keenly impacted by a BBC presentation of a fisherman in Sri Lanka at the time in 2005, where his entire coastline and his entire village and all 15 members of his family were wiped out. And he was being interviewed. And though he was tearful about the loss, in the meantime, what had happened before the news crews got there was that the few survivors of the village and the few survivors of the neighboring village who for generations they had been at odds with had gotten together and collected the orphans left by the deaths of all their parents, and they had united and created a kind of orphanage together. So they had resolved the tensions of generations, and they had found parents and children and whoever was alive, and they created new families. And the tears in his eyes during the report were, this is the most significant experience that's ever happened to me. And they were actually tears of joy. That I found new children to father. I gave new children hope. I brought villages that were in strife together, that had been in strife for generations. So because the circumstance is actually empty, you can't say that the tsunami inevitably, in a fixed, reified way, was negative. It would be a subjective interpretation. It's down to subjective interpretation. Some people have the karma to perceive the tsunami as devastating and maybe never internally recover as a result. Other people would find the tsunami devastating, but then have the flexibility of mind to reevaluate it or to see it through a new perspective. One is the ripening of the actual circumstance or event, but the real karma is the interpretation.
Is that person, the fisherman you spoke of,
Yeah.
was he not a partially enlightened person who was able to see a positive out of that horrifically negative thing?
Yeah, he was more awake than I would be.
Yeah.
If I lost my kids, I tell you, I doubt the whole thing. I doubt the whole thing. All of this right now. If something happens to my kids, I'll hang on by a dental floss. I promise you that. Yeah, something transformative happened to him. But what I'm saying is precisely my point. It's not random. You have to be able to account for it, which is what I'm saying when we went to research some of these different interpretations of karma that didn't stray away from the concept of cause and effect, but ended up putting them in different domains so that everything is being done. When they say everything is karma, they're right. But according to this one particular teaching, they're saying that everything is karma, but it happening in different domains of experience. So you're actually not responsible for weather. You're not responsible for organic matter. You're not responsible for cancers, like cells growing into cancers. You're not responsible for other people's actions. All you are responsible for is your interpretation. And in the moment, do you even have choice of your interpretation? Yes or no? If I come over there and I hit you, do you have a choice to go, oh, well, how should I respond to this? It's instant. That instant is called a ripening effect. That instant is called a ripening effect. You have no control over it. It's already been planted based on your own conditioning, your own choices, your own circumstances, your own conditions. In the moment that an adverse condition hits you, your interpretation is the ripening effect, and nothing you can do about it. But if you build and build and build certain capacities, perspectives, maybe in the future something similar might happen, and you might instantaneously have a different ripening effect. So in the cases of abuse, it's the same thing. And I've actually heard different interpretations, like one of the lamas, Kensei, what's his name? Not Dilgo Kensei, another. He wrote The Guru Drinks Bourbon. Zongzo Kensei. Sometimes I've heard him talk about this kind of karma, where he's basically saying you're not, because I think in light of Rigpa, he gave two different public comments about the Rigpa situation. One had to do with Samaya, but another one had to do with you're not responsible if someone did something awful to you. You're not responsible for what they did to you. You're only responsible for how you interpret, how you deal with it. Huh?
Maybe you're not responsible. Yeah, that's quite easy to see. You're not responsible if somebody does something nasty to you directly, but certainly I must have created some conditions to be in that place and to experience.
I agree, but it's delicate. There's a little line there. There's a little line that I think the tendency to go over the line and claim it all versus having this kind of pocket, of almost like a pocket where, yes, you made choices to be there, and yes, this person made choices to be there. I mean, the abuser didn't fall out of the sky. The abuser may have been himself or herself abused and is making choices that lead up to a moment where two heads meet in a particular modus of time. But one makes a choice to hit you, and you have already set yourself up to interpret that in a particular kind of way. But that is different than saying, I caused this to happen to me. Okay, but the way that I understand that is as a skillful means, because at that level, I mean, that chapter is not for the average person. That's Lojong, and what he's trying to do there is it fits nicely, because what he's trying to do there is have you expand your notion of what's possible in order to accelerate your development and your sense of responsibility. Because they say that the high-level Lojong practitioners are not people like us who try to avoid adversity. They're looking for adversity. They're looking for ways to activate the last remaining stores or deposits of their karmic tendency so that they can ripen. So that I call them demon hunters. They're out there on the frontier not trying to avoid this stuff, but they're actively trying to get as close to the fire as they can to increase their tolerance or their patience or their forbearance or whatever. It happens in the patience chapter. Right, so this is someone who would go and say, well, the person who is most unkind to me, that's the person who I respect as my greatest teacher. Right, that's from the 8 verses. He who treats me so unkind, may I take them as my greatest teacher. I think these are mind trainings. They're like apparatus. They're apparatus. They're too advanced for me. I mean, I just had a falling out with one of my teachers, and it might take me years to figure it out, Never mind go looking for a situation like that.
So is it an oversimplification to say the event is not your karma, but your unconscious conditioned response to it is your karma?
Yes, I don't think that's an oversimplification, but please, just for the purposes here, know that that's not the mainstream interpretation.
So, but does that mean that, if I've been doing a ton of practice and somebody pushes me on the street and I'm like, wow, frustration is arising in me, anger is arising in me, that's still ripening, right? That's still the karma.
That is your karma.
But I arrest it, or I change the story, or there's some empowering action in being aware.
Okay,
and not saying pushing back
let's
or-
dissect it. Because it's a relatable example. It actually happened to me. I may have used this in the book. We're over here, and this person's over here, right? They choose to be here. You choose to be here. They hit you. You didn't cause that. They chose to do that. It hurts because physically that's what it's like to get hit. It creates a sensation of pain.
Is that pain a ripening?
That pain is a different kind of a ripening. It's a physical ripening.
Okay.
Remember, there are domains. If I take a hammer, there's no enlightened person that's not going to feel the pain of that. But how they might interpret it might shift. Yes or no? So I'm walking down New York City street with my mom, and there's a crazy person, homeless person, that's barking swear words and kind of pursuing us. And he's directing them at me. And I feel myself first get afraid, but then get extremely angry. And then as he gets closer, I feel humiliated because he's persistent. And I feel something akin to what it might have been like in my childhood with an overbearing parent whom I couldn't dissuade or control. He barks and barks and barks, and then eventually he leaves. And I turn to my mom, and she looks at my face, and she goes, "Why are you so upset?" And she was laughing. She's like, the guy is mad, simply mad. Crackers, she said. Don't you have that expression here? Absolutely crackers. And she's laughing. And I'm like, my knickers are in a twist. So, two interpretations. My mom and I have two different interpretations of the same situation. So the physical hit would be sensation, nothing you can do about it, but the arising of irritation, the arising of fear, and then the arising of humiliation is definitely my own conditioning, my own response, my own uncontrolled ripening effect. And my mom's of like laughter, humor, is definitely her ripening effect. How else can you account for two different interpretations of the same event? But then if you're gonna talk about it the old way, whose karma brought that person there in the beginning? Or do you share that karma? I don't really know. In a way, it doesn't really matter. I think the most important thing about whatever interpretation that you use is not to get distracted with the blame game. It's to get responsible for the agency part. We can't do anything about how we feel in the moment now, because now has already been conditioned. Now, when I'm feeling humiliation, I do have a choice how I relate to that humiliation. If you're anything like me, you can stew and brew on the humiliation, yes or no? If the anger arises, you can stew and brew on the anger, yes or no? So the anger arises, nothing you can do about it in the moment. But then the stewing and the brewing is an active process in the moment. That active process of stewing in the moment is like planting a seeds for the next encounter. So the humiliation is the ripening of a past seed. The way that you meet the ripening becomes the seed for the next encounter. So if I then have a moment where I see myself humiliated, and I can then try to like maybe take a deep breath there, and then I can ask my mom for a hug. That would be different. That would be something I've never done in my life. That would be an acknowledgement of my vulnerability and a request for support. That then becomes the seed for a different kind of outcome in the future. Maybe one more imbued with self-love or dignity or whatever word you want to put in there. The hard sell with our pop culture is that we want that nice effect now. We don't want to hear there's nothing you can do about it. It's painful and like tough luck. It's like you have to accept it. And yesterday's class, we talked about acceptance and change. Here it is again. The ripening effect, what can you do with it? Accept it. The way that you relate to the ripening effect becomes the change response for the future. So then forget the difference between this and the mainstream interpretation and this like tiny little idiosyncrasy interpretation. The main teaching, the main import is take responsibility for how you relate to your internal circumstance.
Would you say that those who masters or awake are people who have decoupled cause from what they experience?
Not decoupled, fully or taken responsibility for it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a difference. They're not like hanging out in some detached way, like not experiencing something. It's the opposite, like this. I'm sorry, your name?
David.
And behind you? Huh?
It's almost like
Riddick. Reddick. So Reddick's talking about a very high-level teaching that comes from the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, where they're working with some of our greatest afflictions and actually going to pursue them because they want them to happen. They want them to happen because they understand that there are seeds in our consciousness, definitely since beginningless time, that are going to be nasty little nuisances in your pursuit. And the more inclined you are to let them come up without reactivity, it's like you exhaust them. It's like coal in a steam train or coal in a furnace. By letting them burn out and not replacing them with more coal, you extinguish them. Because once they ripen, they're done. So
But there's no blame. You might have like a massive experience of something, of like anger or pain, but you're not putting cause on the seeming cause of it. You're not placing blame.
well,
You're
this,
taking,
yes.
does that make sense?
It totally makes sense, and maybe in this novel interpretation, what I'm saying is you take responsibility for your ripening, but that doesn't mean you don't hold Rigpa's leader to account for his. You know what I'm saying? Like, what he did, we need to hold him responsible to. How we feel about it, we have to take responsibility for. Okay? But I don't. If you were a female member of his sangha and you were taken advantage of, blaming you is not the right thing. It's more like it was wrong what happened to you. Exactly what Geshe Tenzin Zopa is saying. You're pure. You didn't cause that. That's not your fault. That was absolutely inexcusable. It was horrible. I can't imagine what must have been like for you to feel so humiliated and powerless. But now what are we going to do about it? You're powerful, and you can take responsibility for your life, and you can constructively use this to create more compassion for yourself, or greater dignity, or greater assertiveness, or you can reclaim your boundaries, or you can be constructive about what has happened to you. Hmm? Yeah, well, this is why I think...
As opposed to dying of lung cancer at 70 or smoking or like, this is kind of where, if I had someone come back and say that to me, like, how do you stay calm?
Yeah, so the mainstream is like anytime there's a death or an illness, it is the ripening effect, right? But this different interpretation says, well, yes, the physical body that's decaying as a result of the cancer is the ripening, is a ripening, but you can also die with much more dignity, and how would you explain that? Or you can die with tremendous amounts of fear, and how would you explain that? And in the case of a child that's been molested, this is why I think it's important to at least have this alternative view, so that a child doesn't remain the rest of their lives feeling like it was their fault, but that they actually feel empowered to do something about it, and that it is their responsibility. That's the purpose of their life. It becomes the purpose of their life to transform adversity into their own advantage. But you don't necessarily need to tell them that it was their fault. You have to emphasize the responsibility part and the empowerment part. You don't have to live like a victim looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life. But that's not going to be a good circumstance for you. There are all alternatives. There are people, look at the Tibetans, are amazing creatures, right? There are many cultures that have survived genocide. Some of them are very jaded and paranoid, and the Tibetans seem very open-hearted. And so I think they're a very useful, constructive example of how tremendous, devastating occurrences can happen, and yet somebody can rise to the challenge and live an even more dignified life as a result. Instead of focusing on why did it happen. This is the other thing, is we want to know why. We want to have an explanation for the unexplainable. And I think this is why sometimes traditionally the teachings of karma just serves as a place to explain, well, God is punishing you, or it's your karma. And all I'm saying is, maybe this interpretation is all bollocks, and I'm sorry if it is. But what if it was just, practically speaking, it got you unhooked from being fixated on the why question and the blame question, and moved the cursor over to your agency and empowerment, and made you realize this is where you're working. This is where the karma teachings have their most benefit here. Don't worry about everybody else and what they've done and what happened with the tsunami and why this and why that. Because you can search and rack your brains forever. Or you can fill in the gap of the mystery, the great mystery, with a resounding sense of blame and carry that cross the rest of your life. In both cases, you're completely missing the revolutionary teaching that I think that the Buddha is delivering with this, which is, what you cannot change what has happened because it is coming from somewhere. It's not random, but you can change what's going to happen in the future. Now, in our culture of instant gratification, it just does not fly, because we only live for now. We only live for now. But Buddhists, if you're really a Buddhist, you are not only living for now, you're living for now and the future. You're not only living for yourself, you're living for yourself and others. You're not only living for pleasure, you're living for the bliss of liberation. That is a very profound teaching. I not only live for myself, not only live for now, but for now and the future. I not only live for myself, but myself and others. I not only live for pleasure, but I live for pleasure and the bliss of liberation. That is very Buddhist. That's a very Buddhist way to live. Well,
Does that interpretation explain
Well, in a way, it uncouples, there is an uncoupling, is uncoupling the ever complicated teachings on rebirth from the import of just developing agency. So if you wanted to include this particular teaching within the cosmology of rebirth, I think you could, and then if that were too far a stretch for a lot of people, that other stuff becomes a distraction. You would just here's okay. You want the continuation part of it? Sure. How's the energy? Do we have to do jumping jacks and press ups? Press ups. So one of my teachers likes to do this because he does believe that the sense of continuity over time is important. A secular modern, like your famous Stephen Batchelor here in town, he's thrown the whole thing out. Secular Buddhism, he's agnostic Buddhism, has absolutely nothing to say about past and future lives. But Joe Luizzo likes to say, well, actually modern people, secular people, already have a concept of continuity. It just is in the domain of biology. We have biological continuity because we have hereditary. We have DNA that spans lifespan. Yeah? You are the inheritor of your ancestors' DNA. And we have epigenetics, which is showing how in present time, in present life, your decisions and your conscious actions switch on or switch off certain DNA. So you're inheriting something from the past. Your choices count now for the future. Boom. Something very close. The only problem is it's not your life in either direction. It's not your life. So then we don't care enough. We'll destroy the planet because we only care about, we'll smoke an extra pack of cigarettes and have a few whiskeys because we don't really care about the next. If my child develops an addiction or propensity towards addiction because of what I've done here, maybe we could sneak in some sense of responsibility to our offspring, direct offspring. So there's at least the biological framework already in place, but I think what the Tibetans are trying to do is, in parallel with that, there's a psychological continuity. And because our paradigm of reductionistic science doesn't even consider consciousness to be not a feasible, but a proper object of study, appropriate, whatever, is not even considering consciousness, then we haven't made that leap from the biological continuity over life to the psychological one. But we do have one that has to do with linguistics. It's called transgenerational narrative. We do accept the fact that if you were raised by your parents who delivered to you particular narratives and frames of organizing information and experience by way of language, that you will adopt that. And the way that you frame suffering and the way that you frame joy or happiness for your children will be passed on. So we do accept that. So we're getting closer. We're getting closer to the idea that nothing is random. We inherit from the past some way of understanding and interpreting our experience, and what we do with whatever we experience in any given moment will follow us. We just don't have that sense of, what is it called? That we'll be the inheritor ourselves, that we will inherit it. But if you look at the selflessness teachings, not even the Buddhists should feel like it's going to be you that inherit it. It's not going to be John that inherits, the conditioning and the choices that you made at this moment. Or unfortunately, because you have a precious human embodiment and you'd like to have one again. What's the next slide, just by curiosity? And what time do we go? Said we go till? Oh, have we missed another tea, Sue?
We're finishing at 5.
Okay. Is it only when the American teachers come that you miss tea? What should we do? Should we have a stretch and a loo break quick? Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.